Good morning. Good morning. Our opening words this morning are a story about one of our spiritual ancestors, Hosea Ballou, who was an early Universalist. And this is a story about him told in a biography by Ernest Cassara. He had gone to an inland town for a preaching engagement and had made arrangements to stay with a lady who, as it turned out, believed that men are to be saved only if they are good. Arriving at the house on Saturday afternoon, Ballou found her in her kitchen, mop in hand. Looking up, the woman said, "This is Mr. Ballou, I suppose?" "Yes, madam, my name is Ballou." "Well, Mr. Ballou, they say you hold that all men will be saved. Do you really believe that doctrine?" "Yes, madam, I really believe it." "Why, sir, do you really believe that all men are going to be saved, just such creatures as they are?" Seeing that she did not understand the nature of salvation, Ballou asked, "What is that you have in your hand, dear woman?" "Why," she replied, laughing, "it is my mop." "Your mop? Well, what are you going to do with it?" "I am going to mop up my floor. I always do it on Saturday afternoon." "Well, sister, I understand you. Are you going to mop it up just as it is?" "Mop it up just as it is?" "Yes. You wish to know if I hold that all men will be saved just as they are. Do you intend to mop up your floor just as it is?" "Why," she replied, "I mop it up to clean it." "True," said Ballou. "You do not require it to be made clean before you consent to mop it." And that was his analogy about salvation for the woman with the mop. We will return to discussing his theology and how we might talk about it in theological terms today, later in our service. For now, will you please join me in our opening hymn, "Our World is One World," number 134. You may stay risen for our unison affirmation printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you on this beautiful fall day. Yay, I love it when it's like this. Well, I'm Deb Weiner. I'm Interim Director of Religious Education here at First Parish, and we are really glad that you came. Whatever is going well or not so well in your life right now, we're glad that you decided to walk in the door today or roll in the door today. And whether you are differently abled, politically radical or conservative, or somewhere in between, older or younger, or in whatever ways you are you, we welcome you. Following the service, I hope that you'll join us in community hour in the common room. You can go out through either one of these doors and head that away. And if you are new or feeling new, stop by the welcome table on your way, and there you can find out a little bit more about us and tell us about you. You can also fill in that blue connection card during the service that should be somewhere in the pew rack in front of you, and we will be glad to hear from you. I want to remind you that religious education classes for infants through high school are going on today. If you have a child or youth who wants to join us, connect with us as we leave the sanctuary in just a couple of minutes, and we will get your child or youth to the place that feels just right for them. Now, in the back of your order of service, I want to call your attention to the announcement and calendar section. Next Sunday, come back for worship led by Annie, which focuses attention on Indigenous Peoples Day, also known as Columbus Day. We will have a one-room schoolhouse program next Sunday, which helps us understand the Day of the Dead, a celebration of fall common in Latinx cultures and countries, and we'll have a special guest with us, Rosa Elena Rivera, who is a singer and storyteller from Mexico. Following worship and community hour today, please join us in the Bacon Room for the first of our programs on extending a warm welcome to all who come to our church, including folks who are transgender or non-binary identified. A light lunch will be available up in the Bacon Room starting at 11:45 a.m., and the program runs from noon until 2 p.m. So come and join us. Once more, I say welcome to you all. And now it's time for a story. And the story that I want to tell you about is one that we have enjoyed, except that I printed the wrong script for the other story, but I know this story. It is, you know how that happens when you're running around? Right. I printed version 1, which Annie and I had talked about, and which we will tell at another time, which is about a spider. That one will come later. But this is about the blind men and the elephant. How many of you have heard some story about blind men and an elephant? A bunch of you, right? And so, do you remember that what happens is that these men go out and they encounter an elephant, and they each try to describe this elephant that they have come in contact with. And one person talks about the silkiness of the elephant as they touch one part. And another one says an elephant is thin as a rope, and they were probably touching the elephant's tail. Another one talks about how the elephant is dry and scaly, and yet another one talks about how it's a creature who is panting, and that person was probably feeling the elephant breathe. They all have these different stories, and they're trying to decide who is right. They get into a bit of an argument, and they cannot come to consensus about it. But of course, What do we know? Who was right in the story? All of them were right in the story because they all knew that there was a piece of the whole and that all those things make up the whole, which is a lesson for us, I think, because we come to everything that we experience with different perceptions, different pieces of knowledge, different experiences. And it's only by being open to sharing those things that we can find out what the answer might be for us. And in fact, it's not always about our perception. It can be about how these things exist in the world as well. So that's the story, improvisationally told. And now it's time for us to join in inviting our children and youth to move to their programs. We're singing this year Cat Stevens' song of affirmation and love for individuality, which ties with the story of that elephant. So it's called If You Want to Sing Out, Sing Out.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to change the mood. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. So, teal hymnal. Do you have one close by? Choir better have one. I made sure they had one. Make sure you have it. Can you turn to 1011 in the teal hymnal? 1011. So we're going to do something that we've not done before out of this book called Return Again. So I'm going to talk to you because it looks like there are 4 lines there, right? But I'm actually going to talk to you about 2 lines. So the way we're going to sing it, Annie and I are going to lead this. Robert will play through the first 2 lines first, and then we'll just start singing. What you do is you sing the first 2 lines, and notice that there is 1 and 2. You see that? So what you do is you sing 1, and there's 2 little dots, and you go back to the beginning, and you sing it again, and then you jump to 2. So first and second ending. Then you jump down, and you've got the last 2 lines, right? And there you just sing those 2 lines twice through. So pretty simple so far, right? You got it? First 2 lines, then last 2 lines. And then we're going to mix you up, okay? So what will happen is, since Annie's already over on this side, she will continue to sing 1. She'll go back to the top after we've sung all this, and she'll sing 1. She'll sing it once through with you, those 2 lines. But I'm going to stay over here, and we're going to sing the last 2 lines, so that the 2 are going simultaneously. You got that? And then what's going to happen, we're going to do choreography and switch. And so you'll do the last 2 lines and the first 2 lines. You'll do the first 2 lines and just go down the second. Now, when you keep going down, your problem is at the very end. Do you see the word fine? It actually is fine. It's Italian for the end. So what you do is you sing born and reborn, not again. Got it? We're certainly going to try to figure it out. Here we go. Everybody stand up.
This is a community that we hope you call home, a place that we hope helps you return to the home of your soul and to who you are and to who you're trying to be in this world. The way we sustain this community is through coming together, bringing our full selves, our gifts, our talents, our love, and yes, our money. The offering will be gratefully received at this time. Near the end of my last year of high school, I found myself semi-intentionally lost in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in northern New Mexico. I'd been having a bad day, a hard week, been kind of a rough month. It had been a tough couple years. The last 2 years I had spent as a student at the United World College of the American West, which is an international boarding school, a full scholarship school that focuses on peace and global understanding. And when I had gotten into this school, I was so excited because I was going to meet people from all over the world and take these interesting classes, and I was going to learn so much and have such an adventure. And all of that was true. It was an extraordinary opportunity, and I learned so much in every possible way. I learned everything from Afro-Haitian dance to how to direct a play to firsthand understandings of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from Israeli and Palestinian students. But I had no idea how miserable all this would make me. It was a really big change because I had grown up and spent much of my childhood and the first part of my high school experience in a town called Normal in Illinois. Many of you know I'm from Normal, Illinois. If you didn't know, you know now. It's a real place. And so I was making a big shift when I went to New Mexico. I was swapping out the cornfields for the mountains, the gravy and cheese sauce for red and green chili, and the suburban kind of malls and chain restaurants that were common in my hometown for hot springs and a post office down the road in my new rural setting. But the biggest shift wasn't really in the geography and the regional cuisine. It was really an internal shift. I had a kind of familiar internal landscape by the time I was partway through high school when I left to go to this new school. And it wasn't to say I was always totally happy or confident. I mean, I was a teenager. I had my fair share of insecurities and doubts. But I had some ideas about myself that seemed pretty consistent, like I was the smart kid. I got good grades easily, and I was in line to be valedictorian of my high school class. It was something I took for granted. Or like, I was the open-minded liberal kid. I was one of only 2 Unitarian Universalists in my entire 1,600-student high school, and many of my friends were more conservative Christians. Some of them were just mainstream and sort of politically apathetic. So I thought I was pretty interesting and out there. And I also thought of myself as someone who knew what I believed in. I mean, I had stood strong. For example, I had gone to a Bible camp with some of those conservative Christian friends I mentioned. And when I went, I was the only kid in the whole camp who didn't give her heart over to Jesus. But I stood strong against peer pressure and pressure from the counselors to embrace their theology. So I thought I was this smart, open-minded, liberal person who knew what she believed in. And then I went to this school with kids from 89 different countries where everybody was the smart kid because that's how they got there. My roommate my first year was from Lithuania, and she had won a national competition to be at that school. Everyone in her country was competing to be there, and she had won. So all of a sudden, I was no longer the smart kid, the open-minded kid, or even someone who knew what I believed in, because as I encountered people from all over the world who had very different cultural understandings of what was right and what was wrong, I started to question things I had never questioned before. And it was sort of like I had this familiar landscape that had all been swept away, and the clearly marked roads and the buildings I took for granted in my internal landscape were gone. And soon I felt like I was getting lost in an internal wilderness, looking for myself, trying to find out who I was and where my worth was. And as often happens when we are running around in a landscape lost, I wasn't getting anywhere. In fact, I was almost like spiraling down deeper into a valley because, I felt stupid, and then I would speak very hesitantly in class, and then kids in my class would make fun of me for speaking so hesitantly, and then I would think I really was stupid, and then I would speak more hesitantly, and you can see how that would work. Or I wasn't quite sure I fit in, so I maybe would leave a social gathering early, and then people thought maybe I didn't like them, and then they didn't invite me, and then I felt more left out, and you can see how that might go. So while on the one hand I was having these absolutely extraordinary experiences, on the other hand I was just spiraling down into a lost place inside myself. And one day I just decided I was going to walk away. And I remember I took a diary. I don't know if I took water, but I walked off into the foothills of the mountains. I guess I was going to try to go find myself in the physical landscape since I couldn't find myself internally. And so I walked and walked past the trails that were familiar that I often walked on near my school until I didn't really know where I was anymore. And I was exhausted, and I sat down, and I had a really profound spiritual experience. And it was an experience where I believed something that I already believed, but all of a sudden I felt it, I knew it. It went from being something I believed up here to something I knew in my body. And one of those things that I suddenly knew in that moment in a different way was the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, I was raised Unitarian Universalist, as I mentioned, and as many of you probably know, I hope, our first principle of our 7 principles that we agree to affirm and promote is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I believed that, and I would tell you I believed that. But there's a difference between saying it and knowing it. And it's actually kind of a wild thing to believe that we have inherent worth. Inherent, like it can't be taken away, like it's not dependent on whether you're good. And it reminds me of our Universalist heritage. It reminds me a little bit of Hosea Ballou. So he was coming in, you'll recall, being a Universalist preacher, and he went to the house with the lady with the mop, and she thought that men had to be good to be saved. And she thought, you mean we can be saved just as we are? And of course, his retort was to remind her that she mopped up her floor just as it was, and basically his theology was that God could mop us all up because we're all dirty floors. Now, that's not quite how I'd articulate my theology, I have to say. I think we're a little more complex than dirty floors, and I don't think that God is coming to mop us up. But the way that theology got passed down, right? We evolved through our Universalist and Unitarian Christian heritages. The way I'd articulate it now is to say that love is the bottom line. Love is the bottom line. No matter how dirty the floor, no matter how much we screw up, love is the bottom line. And that is a very radical concept. It leads to all kinds of ways that we need to change our society, which would be different sermons for different days. But in this moment, what it meant to me was a felt sense that I could stop looking for myself. A felt sense that I already was loved, already had worth. I couldn't go off and find it. And in that moment, I decided I was going to make some changes. I decided I was going to change some of the way I was interacting with the world, and I chose a symbol to represent that change. So I had been going by Anne, which is the name on my birth certificate, for years. And this happened because in 2nd grade, a teacher decided to call me Anne, and then it just kind of stuck. And I had been Anne all through school. But before that second grade teacher, I had been Annie, because my family called me Annie or Annie Kate when I was a kid. And when I was sitting out there, I decided, you know what? When I was a little kid, I was really enthusiastic. I was really curious. I didn't spend a lot of time wondering who I was in the world or like, was I good enough? I was just living my life. And I thought that maybe I could take a little bit of that Annie and be a little more curious, a little more engaged, a little more focused on the world and on living than on what was going on inside. And I decided I'd start going by Annie. And so I didn't do that right away because I was almost done at this school and it seemed kind of silly. But when I went to college in the fall, I introduced myself to everyone as Annie. And I've been Annie ever since. Part of what helped me to imagine this shift, I think, was another felt sense I had in that moment, another piece of our theology that actually came to me, I think, from some of the Buddhism I was learning about in my world religions class at the time. I was in a world religions class at this school. And the teacher of the world religions class was a Buddhist practitioner. And he was this old man with a white beard who lived in the mountains and had a very loud laugh. And I found him very striking. And I always listened to everything he said. And I remember that in class we learned about this Buddhist concept of there being no self. Anatman is how you can say it in Sanskrit. Atman being the permanent soul in Hindu theology, the milieu that the Buddha was coming into, and Anatman being not having that permanent soul, that essence that makes you who you are, but rather being made up of all these different factors. There's a term for this that gets translated different ways into English. Can be called dependent co-arising or conditional genesis, which are basically fancy ways of saying we're all interdependent. Interdependent. Does that sound familiar? That we're made up of all these different factors, and who we are depends on the people around us, the food we eat that someone else grew, what we learned from someone, and all the different ways you can think about how who you are has been impacted by circumstances and people and places and things, and we're not just some concrete, discrete entity, right? We're interdependent. And that's another of our Unitarian Universalist principles. It's the seventh one, the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. And so I think that while I wouldn't have articulated it this way at the time by any means, part of what was happening to me in that moment was an awareness that who we are is always shifting and changing. It depends on so many factors. And if that's true, then I didn't have to find myself so much as reorient myself, which is what I was trying to do with that name shift. Reorient myself away from focusing on the self towards focusing on life. Right? The Buddha taught about clinging, how we cling to things, and one of the things that we cling to, us humans, is the self. And it was about releasing that, although I don't know that I would have put it that way at the time. And so for me, that experience of knowing, deeply knowing that love is the bottom line, inherent worth and dignity, and knowing that we're all connected, interdependence, I call that experience of knowing that, I call that God. And you might call that something else. You might call it love with a capital L or a lowercase l. You might call that your ancestors. You might call that Mother Nature. You might call that a psychological insight. You might call it enlightenment if you're in a Buddhist tradition. There's lots of different ways to describe that, and the word that helps me describe that is God. And by connecting in that moment with God, I was able to get reoriented. And so I walked up the closest hill that I could find and looked out, and I saw one of the iconic buildings from my campus, which was a castle up on a hill, pretty easy to spot. I saw it, and I just started walking towards it. And I wish I could say that that was the last time I ever got internally disoriented and needed to find my way, but of course it wasn't, right? We're all humans, and we all know that that is not a one-time occurrence. I remember just a couple years after that, I went off to college, and I had been at this private liberal arts college that I was loving and having the best time. And then I learned, because of an event on our campus, and because of the testimony of other students, that my campus had a really serious racism problem, and I had not been aware of it. And I found that incredibly disorienting. I thought of myself as a good person, and I thought of my campus as a good place, and how could it be racist? It was so disorienting. But I was able to find my way to a viewpoint where I could see the direction to move, thanks to the community around me, and I was able to go in that direction. Later, I went to seminary, and I really did not want to go to a Christian seminary. I had not had the best experiences with Christianity, as we mentioned previously with the Bible camp. But that's the seminary that gave me funding, so I went. And then another very disorienting thing happened, which was that I fell in love with Christian theology and story and practice. And I wondered if I'd have to give up my Unitarian Universalist faith, because I thought, can I be a UU if I'm becoming a Christian? But people helped me reorient. They helped me see the landscape and see a way forward. And then years later, I had my daughter Moira. After years, my whole life thinking, oh, I want to be a mom and I want to have children. And when I first had Moira, I was so miserable. I was panicky and terrified. I felt trapped. I had a horrible time at the beginning, and I doubted myself so much. How could this thing that I wanted so bad be so awful? But I had people there to reorient me, to support me and hold my hand and help me to see the larger view and chart a way forward that included being a mom and having my full life at the same time. And I think that is the way. That any time we feel lost, like we need to find ourselves, like something happened, maybe we thought, who am I without that relationship? Or who am I without that role, that job, that place in my community? Who am I without that skill or that ability? Who am I if I'm not the smart one? Who am I if I'm not the good one? Who am I if I make a big mistake, right? This happens to all of us, and I think that the best thing we can do is to try to remember those two deep truths. That we are interdependent, that we are not fixed or static, we are not one thing. We're like that elephant. We're all the things, all of them at once. And our worth cannot be stored in any one aspect of ourself. Our identity is not found in one piece of us. We are interdependent. And love is the bottom line. Love is the bottom line. We can never be lost, because love will always be there to catch us. We have inherent worth. And with those two pieces, our first and seventh principles, I think, and some help from our communities, from those who love us, I think we can always find our way to a viewpoint where we can see where we want to head and keep moving in that direction. I invite you to join in singing our closing hymn, which is Abide With Me. whenever we feel lost, may we find those loved ones and that greater love to abide with us until we find our place again, knowing that none of us can ever be lost, even when we are disoriented. May it be so.